Good afternoon, everybody. How are y'all doing? I know post-lunch is like, even without a conference at home, this is the worst time of the day for me. This is getting espresso. Let me tell you, give me a 5 a.m., I am getting shit done. I am bam, bam, bam. My wife and I, we split up our jobs. I'm the early morning kid, send them to school, all that stuff, and I get my blog post done in the morning and all that. And then like I eat lunch, and then it's like all downhill from then on. But I'm going to fake it. I'll have you know, if you haven't gone down the hallway yet, there's 2 booths doing like good, strong coffee. You can get a latte, an espresso, stuff like that. They're like sponsored booth, free coffee. Compared to the conference coffee, which is, yes, it's coffee. True story. When I was first dating my wife, I wanted to cook for her because, on the show that I could actually cook. And I made this meal, and she was like, yeah, that's cooked. I was like, all right. She's nice and honest. I love that about her. So just before we begin, one quick content warning about this particular session. I want to be honest and straightforward ahead in case you want to choose to leave now. There's no peanut butter in this session at all. I'm sorry. Quick show of hands. Who likes crunchy peanut butter? All right. Other show of hands. Who's wrong? All right. There's only one kind of peanut butter, and it's like the extra crunchy stuff. So, hi. I am Raymond Camden. I am a developer evangelist for Adobe. Yes, we do developer stuff. I work on a team that does APIs for working with PDFs and documents. So if you ever need to automate processes for doing like merging or OCRing or extracting information from documents, we have APIs that allow you to automate that and do really cool stuff with it. I am not talking about that at all today, so don't tell my boss. But if that sounds interesting, definitely find me at some point today. I'd be happy to talk to you more about it. I have a blog at raymondcamden.com, and I tweet at Raymond Camden. If you have any questions, my DMs are open. So far, that's not been too abusive. I'm pretty lucky, I guess, in that respect. But you can DM me any questions at all. I will warn you ahead of time, I tweet a lot, and I have opinions. Shockingly, I don't just tweet about tech. It's weird, like some people, like I've had people tell me, you should stick to tech. I'm like, I'm a human. I have opinions. But I have a couple options for you if you don't want to follow me. I have a couple bots. I have one called Monster Conflict, which uses a Dungeons & Dragons API and a language processing service to generate random conflict between monsters and how they're resolved. And I thought this one in particular where, let's not fight. Let's just talk about cats. You can definitely follow that. You may not know, because they don't talk about it, Marvel has an API, and they have a huge database. So I built a Twitter bot called Random Comic Book that just picks a random year, picks a random issue, and shares the cover. Fun game to play with this is to look at the picture and guess the decade, because the art styles absolutely have changed over time. I built a demo a long time ago where we could search for a character like Spider-Man, and we get 100 comics from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, aughts, etc. And the art style is so obvious as a change. And last but not least, again, if you don't want to follow me, you can follow Super Joy Cat, which, who could not smile at that? Again, follow me or not, it's all good. And seriously, I love to blog about stuff, and I love to answer questions. So if you have a question about what I'm talking about today, or cats, definitely reach out and I'd be happy to answer it. So I want to start off by talking about the Jamstack, because yes, this is yet another marketing term. Our entire industry, we just love this crap. Let's make something new just so we can name it. I part hate it and part also appreciate how these kind of terms also set context quickly. I've been talking about this particular topic for 5+ years now, and it used to be talking about static websites. But it was always, static websites, but dynamic A, B, and C. And having a term like Jamstack kind of allows us to kind of skip some of that. Just like when we say cloud, no one is saying, oh, that's still a real server. Yeah, I know some people are still saying that. But when you say cloud, you immediately get some context in terms of what we're talking about. It was previously known as capital Jamstack, and before that, static sites. And again, the term static sites was a bit too reductive in terms of what's involved here. My definition, and I will break the cardinal rule of presenting, I'll read from the slide and say it's a way of building sites that relies on pre-rendered dynamic content living in production as static assets enhanced with client-side JavaScript APIs for interactivity. When I was younger, I used to be able to say a lot more in one breath. I just turned 49 a couple days ago. Thank you. Thank you. I only feel 84, so I think I'm doing okay. So a great way, I think, to kind of think about the Jamstack is kind of do a kind of before and after. I talk about how at least I used to build websites and applications and how I do it now. My old web stack for probably 10 plus years was Apache, sometimes IIS when I hated myself. Cold Fusion? Anybody? Raise your hand if you've heard of Cold Fusion. All right, a couple of you. Have you heard of PHP? Yeah, same thing, but not free. MySQL, but also SQL Server, Oracle, etc. And this was very flexible. I could pretty much build anything. And I spent 10 plus years being very successful building Web 1.0 type applications, talking to databases, stuff like that. It was very powerful. I could pretty much do anything and everything. But at some point, I realized that I had a lot of things going on for a website that maybe got one hit a day. And I was using SQL Server Enterprise for a content-driven site where the content changed once a month. And while typically I never paid for that because I had good friends in the industry who would just give me free hosting, I realized that I definitely did not need all that because all I see there in that picture is 8 tires that could go flat. It's a lot that could go wrong. So at some point, we started talking about this idea of static sites, static websites. Over 10 years ago, one of the first generators was made as a way to take some dynamic content and essentially let it be dynamic when you're working locally, but the output from this would be static files. So as an example, you could take some Markdown. If you've never heard of Markdown, it's a simpler way of writing HTML. You can skip things like paragraph tags, for example. So if there's white space, Markdown knows that means it's a new paragraph. You could take some static handwritten data, some XML, some JSON, some YAML, etc. You may call an API to get some data. You take all this and your static site generator will essentially merge this into flat HTML, and then you deploy just that, which basically means you go from a stack that has a lot of moving parts and a lot of things that can go wrong to just files. And the idea of just files is very, very appealing. I've been running a blog since about 2003. And at some point in that history, I switched to WordPress. And WordPress is an amazing technology. It's very, very powerful. But if I looked at it wrong on a day that ended in Y, something broke. Either PHP or MySQL or WordPress, it just crapped the bed if I even thought about it. I will fully put the blame on me, but I did not want a 24-hour job keeping a WordPress instance running. Keeping files running, I could probably handle that. So when we talk about static site generators, there are a few options out there. I will look at this first link to give you an idea. And there are 460 of them, but the other resource says there are only 333. I want to make a new one just to make that number uneven or unequal there. So there are a lot of different generators out there. Basically, it boils down to just like when you build anything in JavaScript, you know there's a couple libraries out there. Someone right now during this talk is releasing a new JavaScript framework. And in the next talk, it will happen again. The good thing about that is that all these different tools, they appeal to different people. They have different ways of doing things that are going to click with you in a different way. Through my history of kind of working in this area, I have found that, did something flash? I didn't touch anything. It's not you. All right. All right. I walked to you. I can't stand still. What I was saying is that you can find one that appeals to your style. Over the last 5 or 6 years, I have worked with many different generators. Most of them I hate, some I love. And the same thing happens to me when I look at client-side frameworks. When you look at React versus Vue versus Angular, some of those I love and some of those I hate. There's like no in-between at all in there because some of them just click with the way I think. Nice thing is that you have a lot of different options and you can find one that works for you and your team. I'm going to talk about just one today because I can't show obviously 300 plus. But the main thing I want you to take away from this, if you don't like the particulars of what I'm showing, again, you have 300 plus different options. Now, I keep saying hundreds of options. If we were to consider the big names in this space, there's probably less than 10. So you don't have to spend a year looking at every single one of them to find one that's going to match with you. 11e, it's 11e.dev. This is open source. It is node-based. I highlight that because one of the popular options is Jekyll, and it's Ruby-based. And I've got nothing against Ruby, but if you have ever tried to install Ruby on Windows, it's like getting your child to get dressed when they don't want to. You can do it. You're not going to have fun doing it. I like Node. I know Node's going to install no problems, and 11e being node-based is good. It's also extremely flexible in terms of how you work with it. Most of these generators will have a language it prefers, kind of a way to add dynamic elements when you're working. 11e says, you know what, I'm going to give you 11 different options. You pick the one that you like the most. Before I switched to 11e, I was using Jekyll, and Jekyll used a language called Liquid. So going into 11e meant I was able to reuse my same knowledge. What's even better about this is that all these languages have pros and cons. Sometimes they may not work well for what you're doing. 11e says, oh, so you can't use Liquid for what you want to do? That's fine. Use EJS. Use Jade. Use something else. And just drop that in there. I don't care. You will install it like you do most node-based tools, npm install -g. Don't worry about anything. Just install everything. What could possibly go wrong with that? When you install it, you get a CLI that's very simple. You run 11e, and it will take your source and it'll output flat files. You can definitely pass arguments to configure how it works. And you can also set up a quick web server so you can do local development. I'm going to show a quick example of this. All right, and first, y'all tell me if this is big enough. Can you all read that? All right, and this is just going to be a markdown file, and all I'm going to do is that big enough too? I can go bigger. All I'm going to do is run 11e on that README file. I'm sorry, on that markdown file. 11e will scan the entire directory. It's a directory of one file, so it's really quick. And it's going to output static HTML to a folder called _site. And if we look at that, we'll see it's just an HTML version of the markdown. So far, not terribly complex. There's markdown converters out there already. I'm not really doing much that exciting. If we start working with a template language, this is a language called Liquid. If you've ever used like classic PHP, this may look a bit familiar, or classic ASP, where you have a bit of HTML interspersed with a couple of commands. What I've done here is I've created a couple of variables. I have a name, I have an isCool Boolean value, and then I have a couple tokens where I want to output that value. So hello name, I have an if conditional, I even have a simple loop over an array. I'm going to go into that folder. 11t. And we'll actually run the server this time so you can see how that looks. It's going to fire up a local server. It's going to watch those files. In this case, it's localhost 8080. And if I go back and open it up, I can see the name variable changed. It definitely says I'm cool, and I have my list of cats. And if I go in here and say, well, actually, I'm Raymond, I go back. So in case it's not kind of clicking what's happening here, me coming from a Cold Fusion background, and again, you can in your mind just think PHP, whatever. I kind of have PHP/Cold Fusion/AS. I have an app server running here. But when I'm done, this output is nothing more than HTML. So this, when I first started doing this was absolutely a big light bulb in my head, right? Because I didn't want to edit multiple files at one time. I started my web career in 94 or so. So I remember things like, I have a simple 5-page website, but the footer changed. So you were going in 5 files and editing every single one of them, unless you're doing something fancy with Apache and server-side includes. I don't want to have to do that again. And I worried about when I was, leaving the app server world and going to static files that I would lose that. And it turns out you actually do not. If we go on talking about layouts, talking about that example of having a header and footer, within 11e, I could say, hey, this file is going to use a layout. It's going to look in a particular folder for a file that contains the HTML. So if I'm doing something like Bootstrap or some other UI framework out there, I can include it. By the way, I'm the only person at Adobe who doesn't make pretty stuff. So I am a Bootstrap user all the time. Again, this could use any template language and can be changed. So a great example of this is on my blog. For example, I have a core website layout, header, footer, and all that. When it comes to blog posts have a specific layout. They have the title, they have the day they were written, and stuff like that. So my blog post will say I'm using a post layout. The post layout says I use the main site layout. So if you want to build something that chains on each other, you can do that. When we talk about front matter, it's still just plain text, typically going to be on the top of your markdown file, typically delimited with a couple of characters, in this case, dash, 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 and normally kind of a key value type pair. So layout, the value will be something, title will be something, and you can have different ad hoc values. So for a blog post, for example, this is where I would do a blog category. Or for SEO purposes, I write a short description for a blog post. I'll include it in front matter as well. To see this in action, I'm going to go into 3. I took that markdown file I showed you the first time, and all I did was I add the front matter on top. I added a title, I added a layout. 11e will look in the includes folder, layout.liquid, and all I did was put a bunch of Bootstrap stuff and included a variable there called content. And basically that's where 11e will take that page content and drop it in. So that scenario I presented with 5 files, but one thing in the footer changed, that's done. With, again, in production, just having flat files. So if we go here and cd out and back into 11e3, and I'll run 11e serve again, go back to my demo, reload. I can see I have a fancy nav bar. I have a layout, and if I were to go to my layout file and tweak it to say anything else, not nav bar, but beer bar. Another feature of 11e on the server side, it will automatically reload the page for you to save you that 1 second. Just one note, because I screw this up all the time. The automatic reload only works when you have a full HTML page. So that means HTML tag, head tag, body tag, etc. If you're doing some quick ad hoc testing and you haven't added a proper HTML document yet, you won't get the automatic reload. So the next thing I may want to do is start working with data. Essentially, this is how you define global variables and things for your website. This can be done in front matter, as you've already seen. I could also just create a basic file, a JSON file or a JavaScript file for more interactivity, and even do things like apply data to a directory. apply it to one particular file, apply it to the site at large. So if you have, for example, in your footer, a copyright value, and you want to abstract that out into a variable, you can do that. You can create a folder called _data, create global data there. This makes a lot more sense when you look at it, so let's do that. 11.4. So I have a page where I want to list my cats. So I'm using some liquid code to basically say iterate over every cat, show the image, show the name, and show the gender. In my old school world, this would be based on a database query. All right. Again, even if I was not updating the database more than once a year, I would run that database all year long. I'd run a query because maybe I'd cache it if I was thinking ahead. But I told myself, you know what? That data hasn't changed in forever. I'm going to export that into JSON and just have a simple flat file. Yes, I have lost something by not having a database, but that's one less thing to crash as well. I could also make another one called site, put things like the name of the site, the contact email address, and all that is being used in my liquid file as if I had a database. So we'll go into 4.11d serve, come back up, and there it is. Now, just so you know, I could absolutely have a database somewhere running of cats. If I know that this changes once a month, for example, I could automate a process that goes to the database, that gets those cats, that gets the JSON, that copies it into my Jamstack site, and my website would be updated. You could automate a lot of this and still only have your flat files in production. I think it's pretty handy. If you didn't have just flat data, you could also do something like this, where I write a JavaScript file that's going to hit an API, and in this case, get a list of Star Wars films. And it's going to make that available to my template. Now, this will only be done at production, but I am pretty sure they don't randomly ad hoc release a new film that I am not going to know about. So if I knew, for example, when the next film was coming out, June 22nd or whatever, I could just put a calendar notice. I could automate that. I could set up a schedule. How about once a day we check for a new Star Wars film, or once a month? But all this is doing is hitting that at build time and making it available in my file where I can iterate and show them. So I'm going to show you how this looks when run. And one kind of cool feature of 11e, when it does something that's a little bit slow, it warns you. So in this case, it said, hey, you know what? That one file took 89% of my build time. So as the more complex you get and the more things you do at the build time, 11e is a bit proactive about letting you know that this could potentially slow things down. Okay, go back here. Sorry, cats. By the way, there's a cool Star Wars API, but they basically pretend the new trilogy just wasn't made, which we all have opinions on, but just FYI, it's a great API to test with. Real example of this, I built a demo for a farmer's market site. And what it does is it has at build time hit a weather API. And if it's going to rain, it sets a variable. So the website could say at the bottom, hey, we're expecting rain, we may close early. I set up a service to run that once a day, and my site would just rebuild every day at 6 a.m. so someone could go there and say, oh, you know what, maybe I won't go shopping today because they're calling for rain. I could also do that once an hour if I wanted to be like really precise. You know, it's all comes down to, even though we're dealing with static, simple files, we can absolutely do things to keep the information up to date. And by the way, also, I could say, you know what? I won't do it at build time. I'll do it in client-side JavaScript. So there's a lot more to 11e. It does pagination very easy. Supports tags for separating your content. You could tweak how these template engines work. There's plugins. A great example of this is RSS. So if you don't want to learn the XML for generating an RSS list, They have a plugin to make that a lot easier. There's just a heck of a lot to it. But again, I don't want you to focus too much on 11 because you may hate everything I showed you, but you may like the idea of what I showed you. And there are definitely other options out there that may work better for you and may click better for you. I mentioned Jekyll, there's Hugo, and there's a few hundred more. So I talked a lot about static sites. How do we begin to bring some of the dynamic aspects back? So there's a bunch of different things that we could talk about here. Here's my clicker. Forms. By the way, my web career started, again, back in '95, along with building this basic websites, writing Perl CGI scripts just to process form data. So I love it. Back when HTML5 was like a big thing, everyone was, oh, HTML5. People got real excited about the canvas tag because you could draw pretty pictures. And like nobody was talking about the new form tags. I'm like, y'all, man, we've been doing forms since day one. Anything that makes forms better is a good thing. Anyway, comments, search, etc. I'm gonna talk a bit about each of these. So for forms, you have a couple of ways to do this easier. You have Wufoo, Google Doc, I should say Google Forms, actually. You can build a form in Google Forms and then embed it into your HTML. Wufoo has a dang nice form editing experience, really well done. There are services like FormKeep, FormSpree, GetForm. It's required that it has the word form in it. That's internet law. And a lot of these services work by essentially giving you a magic endpoint. In this case, you can see it's getform.io with a bunch of numbers at the end. And what they will do is they will actually process that form data and do things like, for example, send you an email, insert into a database, do a Salesforce integration type thing. Come back, there we go. It will do just about anything. As a real example, let me show you a Google Form one, and you can see just how lovely it is. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's one thing Google does, it makes things pretty. So I basically designed this form. They gave me an embed tag. This is kind of pretty fat because I made my text a little bigger for y'all. But all this is being handled by Google. So I have a static website around it. Google just gave me their HTML. I dropped it in. If I want to get a little bit fancier, I'll use a service that will embed everything for me. And .com and blah, 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 blah. Hit submit. And I don't know if you saw that. It actually went to a completely different service. That service I have set up to redirect back to my static site. So us web developers, we may say, oh, something crafty is going on. I'm going to use network tools. I'm going to see it went to, in this case, it went to formspree.io. But for the 99.99% of your audience who won't care, they submitted a form, they're back on your website, and they're good to go. In this case, it just ended up in my email. But you can definitely do more complex processes with that if you want. In this case, this is the email that it will send out. Nice and simple. This was the biggest thing that scared me about going to a static site, was losing my blog contact form, because I got a lot of traffic to that. I got a lot of questions that way. So I was very happy to see that. And there's like 800 of these services now. So you don't have to worry about finding one. They all have different price points, different free tiers, stuff like that. You can find one that will match your needs. In terms of comments, again, you have options. The big one is Discuss. Everyone's heard of it. There's even Facebook comments. Please don't, no. Just don't. I don't care where. I don't care what kind of person you are, where you are on the political spectrum. This is the road to hell. Just don't do it. But you can, but don't do it. Services like Commento, Fast Comments. Also, you can go with none. I know as a white male in tech, I'm very privileged. I will not get the type of comments that other people will get. So I know a lot of people just do not want it and not worth the hassle. So consider it. You don't have to have comments on a blog. In fact, I actually turned mine off, not because of anything bad. Again, I'm very lucky. Just I found that the traffic to them were kind of going slow. Disqus has a good API, so I literally wrote code to export all my comments, write it as flat files. So I had probably 50,000 comments on my blog. They're not lost, but I'm no longer loading the Disqus JavaScript library. I'm not doing any of that at all. I'm just rendering those old comments as is. And a brand new one just launched called Disqus, which actually uses GitHub discussion forums as a way to do comments on a blog post. I think it's pretty neat. I haven't used it yet. There's more examples if you download the slide deck. Disqus, if you use it, like a lot of these services, you copy and paste a embed. You will do things, for example, like have a variable for your site name. And as an example, I have a website I created a long time ago that I just kind of gave up on, but I'm not getting rid of the domain, JavaScript Cookbook. And I have Disqus comments at the bottom. I assume most people have seen how this looks. It is very easy. You can get it set up in 5 minutes and have it on your site. They do have good moderation as well. Search, very important for a content site like a blog. And again, you have options. Google Programmable Search Engine used to be called Google Custom Search Engine. I used to recommend this because it was a 5-minute solution. You go there. I say you go there. I'll actually show you. You go there. You make a site. They give you an embed. You copy it, and you have search. And Google knows search, right? So it should work pretty good. 2 big issues with this now that I've recently found out. If you make a new website, you will say, hey, Google, do you mind indexing my new website? Google says, yes, haha, thanks, see you later. I added a site, and it's at a .com and everything, about 3 months ago. Asked Google to index it, and they just never did, period. They have master search engine tools, also related to, checking your site, seeing how it's doing SEO and all that. I added my site there. I set up a robots.txt file, and nothing. And as we know, the biggest issue with Google is that it's amazing until something goes wrong, and then you're out of luck. If you have 1 million Twitter followers, you could tweet something, and maybe you'll get help. But like when I went searching for help on this, people were like, yeah, sorry, get over it. So if you have an existing site, like my blog had been, it's been around for a long time. When I tested it, I had no problems with Google indexing my site. When I did a new site, still months later, it's not there. And of course, the other big issue, let's search my site for Python. Let's see, 1 ad, 2 ads, 3 ads, 4 ads. It's almost like Google's hurting for money. If this was on like a laptop, I guess it's on a laptop, but if this was in my site UI, literally the entire page would be ads before we get admittedly good results. And I'm fine with a free service putting ads. That's fine. But like Google, I feel like when I first started talking about this, they would do 1 ad, they would do 2 ads. And the last couple of years, it's been like, let's do 3, let's do 4. So on one hand, I don't recommend it. On the other hand, if your site's already indexed by Google, it is a 5-minute solution. So just keep in mind that you will be getting a crap ton of ads. Some other good options, Lunar is an open source JavaScript client search engine, which means you're building an index of your site and you're sending it to every visitor of your site. Now that sounds horrible, but depending on your use case, it may be okay. You have a product. Your docs are about 30 or 40 pages. You can create an index of that and send it to the user at maybe 50 to 100K of JSON data. That's not horrible. And then you have an instant search interface in the client, and that could be a great solution for you. I would see this being useful on something like a product doc and things like that. For a blog where content just grows over time, you're going to hit a limit and want to move to more of a server-based solution. Algolia has a set of APIs where they manage your search engine. They have a CRUD-based API where I wrote a new blog post, add this content into your engine. I deleted one, take it out again. And they also have an API for search. Nice thing about both Lunar and Algolia, they'll do all the smart search things. If I search for leaf, L-E-A-F, it knows that that should match leaves. All that kind of fancy stuff that I don't want to think about, they will handle for you. I'm a huge fan of Algolia. They have a great free tier. So typically, my recommendation is smaller sites, look at Lunar. Larger sites, look at Algolia. And if you want to get complex, you can run Lunar in a serverless function and not send things down. What did I want to show? My blog and JS Cookbook. So back on JavaScript Cookbook, this is using Lunar. So this is all client side. And it just plain works. It finds results related to arrays. If I go to my blog, and I'm currently at about 6,200 blog posts. If I search for cats, I've done a few blog posts on cats. So that was near instantaneous. Again, Algolia is commercial, but with a very good free tier. And more calendars, e-commerce, essentially there's solutions for everything out there, and where there isn't, there's a lot of providers that will give you serverless access where you can do any custom logic at all, set up an HTTP endpoint, and you can call that from your site. When it comes to hosting, you could absolutely still use a traditional web server. It's files, right? So if you're still rocking Apache, copy them over to an Apache directory. You're good to go. There are various services out there like IBM Bluemix. I think it's still called Bluemix, or IBM Cloud, whatever. Azure, little company named after a jungle. Somebody help me. Redwood, no. Famous jungle. Amazon, yeah. They have a little hosting service as well that you could use. Oh, yeah, S3. You can host websites up there. They go out of their way to make it a pain in the butt, but you could definitely do that. But there's also, as you can imagine, with Jamstack getting a little bit more popular, there's been companies that have come up that are focusing on just that. Vercel and Let2Fly, or two of them. Microsoft Azure recently created a service. By the way, you've been here almost an hour. You've seen me get on a soapbox once or twice. I'm going to do it again. Microsoft, not a perfect company, but talk about a company that has said, I want to make developers happy. I mean, they are just, compared to a company named after a particular fruit, I really feel like Microsoft is going just as crazy as possible to say, how can I make developers' lives better? I really, really appreciate that. And Cloudflare Pages is another one. Vercel, zero config. You could take something like a Vue.js single-page application, just deploy it, and they know how to handle a Vue.js application. Same for things like 11y. They recognize, oh, that's 11y. I know how to build that. I know the command to do that. I'll just take care of that for you. Free SSL. Who waited a long time to do HTTPS because it was a pain? I know more of you. All right, but we're all doing it now, right? Yeah, all right. It's super easy now. Free CDN, GitHub, etc. integration. They have serverless functions as well. They have pricing. They have a decent enough free tier. Netlify really, I think, is kind of the gold standard. Also, free SSL, CDN, GitHub integration, serverless. They have forms processing baked in, so if you don't want to use a third-party service, you can do that. They have identity baked in as well. Not the easiest thing to use, but if you're tired of writing authentication type stuff, they do something to make it a little bit easier. They have analytics baked in, not free, but decent. And, I'll actually show you that. This is mine for my blog. And unfortunately, it maxes out at 30 days, but I can see page views, visitors, top content, and stuff like that. It is really the gold standard. It's not the only service out there, but typically it's what I compare a new service to. Let's try to attack me. Y'all saw that, right? Got it out for me. I was going to show a demo of this. We're short on time. But what I will say is, for example, this is my my admin portal for my site. One thing I want to point out, and I saw a speaker talk about this years ago. I don't remember his name, unfortunately. Moving to static is not about getting rid of the complexity. It's about moving a lot of that complexity closer to you. So when I was working with WordPress, all the complexity was on a Google machine and in MySQL and Python. It was away from me and it crashed all the time. My current blog setup has a lot of complexity on my laptop, but when I go to production, it's nothing. It's just files. There's very, very little that can go wrong. I wrote a custom Node.js script to make it easier for me to blog. That was complex. I enjoyed the heck out of it. But that complexity is just for me. Nobody else out there has to worry about that. The way that my site goes live now, I have told Netlify to watch the GitHub repository. So I edit one of my files, I commit to GitHub, and Netlify just takes off. So all these deploys here were based on me writing very good GitHub commit messages. New post, new stuff, new speaking, new post. I do not write good GitHub commit messages. But basically, Netlify saw it, kicked off its own build, copied everything to production. And by the way, if something goes wrong, nothing goes wrong, period. It leaves your old site as is. So if you break something, I'm pretty good at breaking stuff, it'll tell you, hey, I broke at this point. Your site is just left alone, which is really good. If somebody files a PR against your GitHub repo, Netlify will make a new website and give it a URL. Hey, you can check out their stuff right here at this unique URL. I don't have to do anything. That makes testing and looking at stuff and working with others super, super easy. So Netlify does have a free tier and multiple different commercial tiers. Analytics, for example, is not in the free tier. You can always just drop Google Analytics on your site. Good job reading those. Longtime user of Google Analytics, and they have done nothing to make it easier, unfortunately. So resources, a lot of these pretty much just point to jamstack.org. You can just go there and get a lot of this. Brian Rinaldi runs the Jamstack newsletter. That's linked from jamstack.org somewhere. It's not. If you want to subscribe, talk to Brian personally. He will subscribe you. Yeah, jamstack.email. All right, let's actually go there. ED. Oh, it's jamstack.email. Great newsletter. This is, by the way, part of the Cooper Press newsletter system. They have newsletters for front-end dev, for JavaScript, for Node, for Python. No, not Python. They have newsletters for a lot of stuff. If you find it difficult to keep up with what's going on in tech, newsletters are great. They show up, you ignore them because you're busy, your kids are going crazy, whatever. You come back to it later, you find the stuff that interests you, sign up for them. I'll also say there is the Jamstack book, the only one you'll ever have to buy, period. Because every book that you buy, I get more royalties. And I have 8 kids, so y'all need to buy some damn books. All right? Brian's my co-author. Manning is still calling it MEEP, which is their beta tag. No, it's done. That should be printing like right now. If you buy the ebook copy, it will still say MEEP, and then like tomorrow probably, they'll say, hey, the final release is here, download the new PDF. If you don't want an ebook, you can definitely buy the physical book, probably again tomorrow or in a couple days. It's real close to being done. Everything I talked about today, what is Jamstack, building a blog, building a brochureware site, building an e-commerce site. Yes, you could do e-commerce with static web pages, serverless, all that dynamic crap I showed, hosting. That's all covered in here. And I can say I have 3 copies to give away, and I can't throw them out because they're PDFs. We could pretend. So what I'm just going to say, if you come up to me later and ask me nicely, I'll give you the code. As simple as that. So first come, first serve. If you come bearing a cookie, you'll get 2 copies. But again, you could buy this. And that is it.